The package was waiting outside my apartment when I came home on a cold Tuesday evening. It wasn't large, expensive, or even unusual. Brown paper covered the box, and the corners were bent as if it had traveled a long way. I almost carried it straight inside with the rest of my groceries, but something about the handwriting made me stop before I unlocked my door. Someone had written my name with a black marker, Natalie Carter. The letters leaned slightly to the right. The final E curled beneath the word instead of ending in a straight line. I had spent 4 years trying to forget that handwriting. My grocery bag slipped from my hand, and an apple rolled across the hallway floor before coming to rest against my neighbor's welcome mat. I barely noticed. "No," I whispered. A young couple stepped out of the elevator behind me, laughing about something that had happened at work. They smiled politely as they walked past, completely unaware that my world had stopped moving. Because I knew exactly who wrote my name like that. Ethan. I carried the package into my apartment without turning on the lights. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows while the city disappeared behind a gray evening sky. Usually I loved rainy days because they made my apartment feel warm and peaceful. Tonight, the silence felt different. It felt as though the room itself was waiting for me to do something I had avoided for years. I placed the box on the dining table and stared at it. 4 years. 4 years without a phone call. 4 years without a letter. 4 years without hearing my brother's voice. Everyone eventually stopped asking where Ethan had gone. Friends stopped bringing him up because they noticed how quickly the conversation became uncomfortable. My coworkers knew I had a brother, but they assumed we simply were not close. I never corrected them because the truth was too complicated to explain, and I was tired of watching people search for the right words after hearing my answer. The strange thing about grief is that it changes shape. At first, it demands your attention every minute of every day. Later, it becomes quieter. It hides inside ordinary moments until something small, like a familiar song or a piece of handwriting, reminds you that the pain never truly disappeared. I reached for the scissors. The tape came away easily. Inside the box lay 3 things: an old digital voice recorder, a silver key attached to a faded blue ribbon, a photograph folded neatly in half, nothing else. No letter, no return address, no explanation. I picked up the photograph first. It showed 2 young people standing beside an old pickup truck under the bright summer sun. One of them was Ethan, smiling at the camera with grease on his hands and a baseball cap turned backward. The other person had been carefully torn away. Only one shoulder remained. Someone had removed them on purpose. I turned the photograph over. May 14th, 4 years ago. I remembered that date immediately because it was the last afternoon I ever saw my brother. My chest tightened. Back then, I thought the photograph had been taken after another ordinary Saturday. Ethan had spent the morning helping Dad repair the old truck, while I complained that both of them cared more about engines than people. Ethan laughed and threw a dirty cleaning cloth at me. I threw it back, accidentally hitting Dad instead. He pretended to be offended. Mom laughed so hard she nearly dropped the lemonade pitcher. It was the last time I remembered hearing all 4 of us laugh together. A loud vibration pulled me back to the present. My phone lit up across the table. Mom calling. I hesitated before answering. We spoke often enough to know each other was healthy, but never long enough to discuss the past. Our conversations stayed safely inside everyday topics like work, weather, and birthdays. Neither of us admitted that we were protecting ourselves. "Hi, Mom." "Natalie." Her voice sounded tight. Did something arrive today? I looked at the open box. How did you know? She did not answer immediately. Instead, I heard her take a slow breath. Don't touch the recorder. I frowned. What recorder? The one inside the package. Every muscle in my body tensed. You've seen this before? No. Then how do you know what's inside? Another pause. I'll explain when I get there. She ended the call before I could ask another question. I stared at the silent phone. She had known about the recorder without seeing the package. That frightened me more than anything inside the box. Curiosity can be dangerous because it rarely arrives alone. It brings hope, fear, and imagination with it. While we wait for answers, our minds create stories that often become more frightening than reality itself. I looked back at the recorder. It was scratched along one side, and a small piece of black tape covered the battery compartment. I recognized it immediately. I had given it to Ethan on his 24th birthday. He wanted to record ideas for songs while driving because he always forgot the melodies before reaching home. You know, I had teased him that day, normal people write their ideas down. He laughed. Normal people don't write good songs. You've never finished one. I only need to finish one. I smiled despite myself. That argument had become a family joke. Every Christmas, Mom asked if Ethan had finally written his hit song. Every Christmas, he answered, I'm getting closer. I suddenly realized something that made my stomach turn. If this really was Ethan's recorder, then someone had kept it for 4 years before sending it to me. Why now? Why not earlier? And who had been holding on to it all this time? A knock echoed through the apartment, not loud, not impatient, just 3 slow knocks. I walked to the door without taking my eyes off the recorder. When I opened it, my mother was standing there with rain on her coat and tears already filling her eyes. She looked past me, directly at the dining table. I hoped, she whispered, that this day would never come. I stepped aside without speaking. She entered the apartment, removed her coat, and rested one hand on the back of a chair as though she suddenly needed its support. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she looked at the recorder. I thought Robert destroyed it. I stared at her. My father knew this recorder still existed? She slowly closed her eyes. No. When she opened them again, they were filled with a sadness I had never seen before. He only believed he had. Before I share the rest of the story, I need to know, where are you listening from? I would love to hear from you. My mother's words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. He only believed he had. I searched her face, hoping she would explain, but she only looked at the recorder resting on my dining table. It seemed impossible that such a small object could carry enough weight to keep an entire family trapped in the past. I pulled out a chair. Sit down. She obeyed without arguing. For the first time since she arrived, I noticed how tired she looked. The sleeves of her coat were still damp from the rain, a strand of gray hair had escaped from behind her ear, and the dark circles beneath her eyes suggested that she had not been sleeping well. You knew this recorder existed, I said quietly. She nodded. I gave it to Ethan for his birthday, I remember. Then tell me why it disappeared. She lowered her eyes. Because after Ethan left, your father searched his room. I frowned. He thought Ethan had recorded something? He hoped he had. My mother folded her hands together. Robert believed there might be a message explaining where Ethan went. He searched every drawer, every notebook, every jacket pocket. When he couldn't find the recorder, he assumed Ethan had taken it with him. But he didn't. She slowly shook her head. No. I looked back at the box. So someone else had it. I think so. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and the soft sound against the windows reminded me of another rainy afternoon years earlier. Ethan and I had been trapped inside the house because of a storm. The electricity went out, leaving us with nothing but candles and a deck of old playing cards. We spent hours inventing ridiculous rules for card games until my father finally gave up trying to understand them and accused us of cheating. "We're not cheating," Ethan had laughed. "We're improving the rules." Dad had rolled his eyes. "That's exactly what cheaters say." I smiled at the memory, before realizing it was the first time I had smiled while thinking about my father in years. Memories are rarely completely happy or completely painful. Most of them carry both emotions at the same time, and that is what makes letting go so difficult. I reached for the recorder. "This ends tonight." My mother watched me carefully. "You don't have to rush. I've already waited 4 years." I pressed the power button. A tiny green light blinked. Then the screen came alive. The battery still had enough power. My thumb hovered over the play button. "You've never listened?" I asked. She shook her head. "I've never even seen it." I pressed play. Static filled the room. Then came the sound of a car door closing. A few seconds later, Ethan laughed. "If this recording actually works, Natalie is officially banned from making fun of me." I laughed through my tears. "I never made fun of you." My mother smiled. "You absolutely did." Ethan continued. "I've recorded over this thing at least 10 times because every version sounds wrong. Maybe that's the problem with telling the truth. You keep trying to make it sound better than it really is." The room fell silent again. His breathing could still be heard. Then another voice entered the recording. A woman's voice. Soft. Young. Barely louder than a whisper. "You don't have to do this." "I know," Ethan answered. "You still have time to go home." "No." There was another pause. "If I leave now, you'll be alone." My mother looked at me. Neither of us recognized the woman. The recording continued. "You shouldn't have to choose." "I'm not choosing." "You are." Ethan sighed. "I'm trying to do the right thing." The woman's voice broke. "They'll hate you." "I know." Another long silence followed. Then the recording ended. Neither of us moved. For years I had imagined Ethan leaving after one terrible argument. Instead, I had just heard him comforting someone who sounded frightened enough to believe she had become the reason a family would fall apart. I rewound the recording. The woman's voice sounded familiar, not familiar enough to recognize, just enough to make me feel that I had heard it somewhere before. "Do you know her?" I asked. My mother slowly shook her head. "No, I've heard that voice before." She looked surprised. "Where?" "I don't know." The answer frustrated me. It was like trying to remember a dream that disappeared every time I reached for it. I played the recording again. This time I paid attention to the background instead of the conversation. There was a faint announcement over a loudspeaker, then a metallic sound, a door opening, someone pushing what sounded like a cart across the floor. Hospital. I froze. My mother saw the expression on my face. "What is it?" "I don't think they're outside." "What do you mean?" "I think they're inside a hospital." She immediately leaned closer. We listened again. Near the end of the recording, the loudspeaker became slightly clearer. "Dr. Collins, please report to oncology." The announcement faded before the rest could be heard. Neither of us spoke. Oncology, the word settled heavily between us. I slowly looked at the photograph lying beside the recorder, the missing person, the hospital, the unknown woman. The pieces were beginning to connect, not perfectly, but enough to change everything I believed. My mother covered her mouth. "Oh, Ethan." Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. "I thought he left because he was angry." "So did I." She closed her eyes. "We never imagined." Her voice disappeared. "Sometimes we create explanations because the truth feels impossible. Once we believe those explanations, we begin collecting evidence that supports them while ignoring everything that points somewhere else. It takes only one unexpected detail to force us to see the entire picture differently." I reached inside the box again. Until now, I had ignored the silver key. A faded blue ribbon was tied around it. Something about the ribbon caught my attention. It had tiny white stars printed across it. I stood up so quickly that my chair slid backward. "I've seen this ribbon." My mother looked confused. "Where?" "I don't know." I closed my eyes. I could almost picture it. A hallway, white walls, a bulletin board, people walking past. Then it came back to me. The hospital. "What?" "I volunteered at St. Mary's during my first year of college." I held up the ribbon. "The volunteers wore these on their name badges." My mother stared at it. "You think that's where the recording was made?" "I don't know, but I know where we're going tomorrow." She looked at the recorder. "You really believe they'll still have answers after 4 years?" I picked up the photograph and slipped it into my coat pocket. "I don't know if they'll have answers." I looked toward the rain-covered window, but someone there knew Ethan. For the first time since the package arrived, I no longer felt like I was chasing memories. I was following a trail, and for the first time in 4 years, that trail was leading somewhere real. The rain had stopped by the time we reached St. Mary's Hospital the following morning. The parking lot was already filling with patients, nurses, and families carrying coffee cups instead of breakfast. Everyone seemed to be moving with quiet purpose, while I stood beside my car, wondering whether I was about to uncover the truth or chase another dead end. "This place hasn't changed much," my mother said. It has for me. The last time I had walked through those doors, I was 19 years old and volunteering between college classes. I remembered delivering flowers, pushing wheelchairs, and helping visitors find the right department. At the time, the hospital had simply been a place where people worked hard. I had never realized that someone I loved might have been living an entirely different story inside those same walls. The automatic doors opened. The familiar smell of coffee and disinfectant greeted us. I looked around the lobby until my eyes stopped on the volunteer desk. An elderly woman wearing a blue jacket smiled politely. "Can I help you?" I stepped closer. "My name is Natalie Carter. My brother volunteered here about 4 years ago." She thought for a moment before slowly shaking her head. "I'm sorry. We had many volunteers." I expected that answer. Then I placed the photograph on the desk. Her smile faded. "I remember him." My heart skipped. "You do?" "He used to bring hot chocolate to the night staff every Friday." I laughed softly. "That sounds like Ethan." He said coffee made everyone too serious. For the first time, Ethan felt real again. Not a mystery, not a missing person, just my older brother making nurses laugh during long shifts. The woman studied the photograph again. He was almost always with a young woman. My mother and I exchanged a quick glance. "Emily Dawson?" I asked. The volunteer nodded. "Yes." "Do you know what happened to her?" The woman's expression grew gentle. "She passed away." Even though I had expected the answer, Hearing the words still hurt. When? 4 years ago. I lowered my eyes. So Ethan stayed with her until the end. He hardly left her room. The volunteer smiled sadly. Sometimes we'd tell him to go home and get some sleep. He always answered the same way. What did he say? She's been alone long enough. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the volunteer opened a drawer beneath the desk. I don't know if I'm supposed to keep this. She placed a small visitor badge on the counter. The faded blue ribbon was exactly like the one tied around the silver key. Ethan forgot it here the last week we saw him. I picked it up carefully. On the back, someone had written a room number, 314. The volunteer noticed me reading it. That room has been empty for years. Still, I thanked her before walking toward the elevators. My mother caught my arm. Natalie, I know. There probably isn't anything there. Maybe. But I need to see it. The third floor looked brighter than I remembered. Fresh paint covered the walls, and new signs had replaced the old ones. Only the room numbers remained unchanged. Room 314 stood at the end of the hallway. The door was open. Inside was an ordinary hospital room with clean sheets, empty shelves, and sunlight pouring through the window. Nothing suggested that one family had quietly fallen apart there. I stepped inside. The room felt peaceful. Too peaceful. Then I noticed something scratched into the wooden windowsill. 3 small words. Keep asking why. I ran my fingers across the faded letters. Ethan did this. My mother looked surprised. How can you tell? He always carved tiny messages into wood. When Dad built the treehouse, Ethan carved "No adults allowed" under one of the steps. She smiled through her tears. I forgot about that. I didn't. Standing in that room, another memory returned. I was 17 when Ethan drove me to my first college interview. I had been so nervous that I nearly asked him to turn the car around. Instead of giving me advice, he stopped at a gas station, bought 2 chocolate bars, and handed me one. Why are we eating candy? I had asked. Because nobody can panic and chew caramel at the same time. It doesn't work like that. We're about to find out. I laughed all the way to the interview. That was Ethan. He never tried to solve people's problems. He simply made them feel less alone. The sound of footsteps interrupted my thoughts. A man wearing a doctor's coat paused outside the room. I'm sorry, he said. Are you looking for someone? I explained why we were there. His expression changed the moment I mentioned Ethan's name. I remember him. You do? He wasn't family. The doctor smiled. At least, not by blood. He sat beside Emily every evening. He argued with me twice because he thought she needed better pain medication. My mother looked surprised. Ethan argued with a doctor? Oh, yes. The doctor laughed quietly. He was respectful, but very stubborn. That sounded much more like my brother than the silent, mysterious version I had created in my mind. There was one thing he left behind, the doctor continued. I've kept it because nobody ever came asking. He disappeared into a nearby office. A minute later, he returned carrying a thin notebook. The cover was worn, and the corners had begun to curl. My breath caught. It was Ethan's songwriting notebook. You can keep it, the doctor said. I think it belongs with your family. After thanking him, we sat on a bench outside the hospital before opening it. Most of the pages contained unfinished lyrics, random ideas, and terrible jokes written in the margins. I smiled. Some things never changed. Near the back, however, I found one final page. It wasn't a song. It was a letter, not addressed to anyone, Just written. If you're reading this, then I hope you stopped looking for someone to blame. I kept reading. Dad loved us the only way he knew how. Mom carried everyone's pain until she forgot how to share her own. Natalie always believed families break because people stop loving each other. I hope one day she learns that's rarely true. My vision blurred. The final paragraph was written more carefully than the rest. Families usually break because people become afraid of difficult conversations. One person stays silent to avoid an argument. Another stays silent because they're waiting for an apology. Years pass. Then everyone forgets who was supposed to speak first. I closed the notebook. No one cried. Not because we were no longer sad, because there was finally nothing left to hide. On the drive home, my mother reached across the center console and gently squeezed my hand. I should have told you I didn't know the whole truth. I should have asked more questions. She smiled. So should your father. When we arrived at my parents' house that evening, my father was sitting alone on the front porch. He stood as soon as he saw us. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then I walked toward him and handed him Ethan's notebook. He held it against his chest without opening it. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Not because one apology could erase 4 years, not because it could undo every misunderstanding, but because it was finally honest. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, the 3 of us sat together on the porch where Ethan used to play his guitar on warm summer evenings. No one pretended everything was fixed. Some wounds need time even after the truth is known. Yet the silence between us no longer felt like distance. It felt like peace. I used to believe the saddest sentence in the English language was, "I lost my brother." Now I know there are sadder words. I never asked him to tell me the whole story. Sometimes love disappears. Sometimes people leave. But sometimes a family simply runs out of conversations before it runs out of love. And when that happens, the truth doesn't arrive with anger. It arrives quietly, years later, inside an ordinary brown package addressed to someone who has been waiting for answers without even realizing it. If you liked this story, please like, comment, and share. More simple and emotional stories are coming soon.